Okay, so good afternoon or evening, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. And as we go through this, send Rudy your questions. We'll be happy to answer anything that you need. And if there's any other questions you want to bring up that aren't covered here, we'd love to hear those as well. And sharing any experiences that you might have with other folks would be great assistance as well. So we'll go start right out. So financial leadership, it requires different skills and characteristics. Knowledge obviously is one thing. If you're being treasurer, I don't know how many here are actually treasurers, or we have other people in other positions. Rudy, do you know that? If everyone here is a treasurer, or we have multiple positions?
I think we have a few multiple positions, but I imagine most of these are treasurers.
Okay, all right, great. So obviously the first and most important thing is, knowledge of the different types of financial reports that need to be given out, not only to your board, but also shared with your club members. We are a nonprofit, whether you're running your 501c4, which would be your club, or your 501c3 if you have a foundation. It's important that you do have financial reports. And financial reports that are reviewed by your board when you have your monthly board meetings, and that they're put away and filed, as they call it, because as a nonprofit, those records are open to the public at their request. So you do want to make sure that you do have those available. We can talk a little bit more about what those reports are as we move forward. Communication is also very important. You need to be able to translate the financial information that's on those reports and the concepts for the board. It's been my experience that in different nonprofit organizations that you may have one or two people who are familiar with these type of reports and with this information, and then you have a lot of folks who understand the concepts but don't necessarily know how to read the reports. So part of your responsibility is to make sure that the information that you're giving is put in a manner which everyone can understand it. As a board member or a director of a nonprofit, you are held personally liable. I mean, everyone does have, director and officer insurance, at least you should have, to protect you just in case something happens. But ultimately, those of us who are board members, we have a fiduciary responsibility to that organization, which means we need to understand the reporting and what's happening with the finances in that organization. You need to be able to explain to the board in many different ways. Everyone understands information differently. Some people are very visual, some people are very auditory. So being able to explain it and reframe it for them so that they truly understand the information that you're giving out. And then also being able to have an interactive conversation with your board, for them to be able to ask questions, for you to understand what they're asking, to clarify, help them with their goals or any concerns they have about the financial information that you're presenting them, especially like during times like now, where nonprofits, as we all know, they're suffering just like every other business. And it's going to now be an ongoing issue for nonprofits as to the funds. What are we going to do? How is the fundraising going to happen? The people that we normally go to, are those people going to be available to, give to our foundations? A big question we have in our club is, how are we going to handle our annual fundraiser? We happen to do, a live auction, presents a lot of different issues. Are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? If we are going to do it, what's the financial impact of that? Are we going to do it as a live auction? Can we even do that? Or do we have to do something that is online? That presents another set of financial issues. So all the decisions that you are doing in your club have some level of financial impact, either at the beginning, the middle, the end, or all the way through. Planning. So that sort of goes to what I was just talking about. Partnering with your chairs is really important. I don't know if all of your clubs if you have a budget and you give it to your chair and say, okay, here's your budget for the year, and then that person can go, and plan the projects, and, which may or may not need board approval, but having them have a budget so they know what, the goal they're going for, and then of course to stay within the expense line that they need to have. Preparing and helping the board with budget discussions in your chairs. A very useful tool that I have found is to actually keep a historical account, if you will, of what the expenses have been. So for example, at the district level, I keep a spreadsheet of a 5-year historical so that as each new governor comes on, I have that information that I can sit down and I can share with them. And as I do that, you want to make sure that you keep track of anomalies that happen during the year. You need to make sure that you have consistency in your reporting and that you're not moving expenses. One year you're calling it, ABC, and the next year for the same expense, you're calling it D, E, and F. If you do those types of things, you're not going to keep consistency, and it's going to be very hard for your board to look at that and to do strategic planning because your numbers aren't syncing up every year. So doing a 5-year history is something that I have found to be a useful tool, and possibly that would help you as well as you continue to plan and work with your strategic plan and your visioning. Of course, budgets, they're the financial version of an annual or strategic plan. So as you're doing your budgets, making sure that they're tying to what you're doing as you move forward. In our particular club, we have it so that, like this year, my president-elect and the president nominee, those people are all on board with what we're doing this year, and decisions that we're making, if they're going to cross over years, we have the buy-in from the next 2 presidents coming down. So we look at it from a longer term and making sure that we can continue the projects we need to continue. So making sure that you have those financials available and having past history will be very important for your board and for your officers who are looking at that. Next thing would be your strategy. Yes, you prepare the budgets. You have to have your financials audited or reviewed each year. You want to bring these type of reports and this type of leadership to the organization. So if you see things that are going on out there, bring it to their attention. You're in a great position to see trends that are happening. So hopefully, it's more than just, hey, I'm putting numbers in the checkbook and I'm balancing the checkbook at the end of the month, and there you go, that's my financial report. It really needs to be more than that, so that you're bringing the value, if you will, to your club and to your board, and also meeting the compliance issues you need to meet as being a nonprofit. And then also, looking down the road to find financial options. If you have investment accounts, are you looking at those investment accounts? What are they doing? Are you working with the person, the investment advisor, where those funds are at? Are they being invested in a manner that's going to allow you to withdraw if you think you need it, like say in a time like this where you still want to do projects, but maybe you're not going to have a fundraiser? Have you set it up such that you can pull funds from those investments without jeopardizing the return on those investments? So these are the types of things to think about as you're doing your position, talking to your board, and setting up your strategic plan. Okay, so getting down into the more nitty-gritty, if you will. So the basic high-level responsibilities are developing a budget, managing the funds, collecting and submitting dues, working with the Rotary Foundation, and of course, mentoring a successor. I know a lot of you have probably been treasurers forever. It's one of those jobs where it's like, yes, somebody accepted it, so let's keep them there forever. Sort of like the secretarial job. But it's a great job, and we should always, though, have in the back of our mind a successor, because we never know what will happen. And it's always great to have somebody else who knows, you know, what's going on with it. Okay, so some concepts and processes to think about as being treasurer. So a lot of times people ask me the question, well, I have a club and a foundation and I have service projects, you know, can I keep them all in one account? Do they have to be separate? So from the purposes of a club and a foundation, those are two separate entities, two separate organizations, two separate tax ID numbers. You have to keep those funds separate. So they should each have their own bank accounts. Within each of those organizations, whether it be your club or your foundation, you can have as many bank accounts as you want to have. Again, you know, you don't want to have so many where you have to separate everything out, but a lot of people will say, I'd like to have my restricted funds kept in one bank account and my service projects or fundraising in another account, and then our general operating in another account. I see that a lot of times, nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that as you're doing it, you're very consistent so that if, you know, the point in time comes when you're audited, that it's very clear to those folks who are looking at it that those funds are kept there and that you document everything. As far as signers on an account, there is no hard and fast rule. However, my recommendation is that you always have two signers. That way there's a check and balance system, you know and have a comfort level in that everything is being reviewed. As far as what approval limits of the signers, that's really up to every club. A lot of clubs make the limit up to, 500 or 1,000. They can just sign it, the two signers. Anything over, X amount then has to come for board approval. So that's really within what you have is your operating procedures. Okay, so that would be your policies. A lot of clubs have these types of things also spelled out in their bylaws. Process of depositing and accounting for the funds. So one of the key things about a club and managing your funds is always to make sure that you have the check and balance and you have dual control. And this really is in place for the protection of everybody. That way, there can, we don't want to put any of our fellow Rotarians in any type of position to be questioning what they're doing. So if you always have the check and balance system, that will work well. Some clubs, depending on the number of members they have, they might have one person who goes to and is responsible for picking up the mail. They have another person, and that person distributes the mail to the appropriate people. The treasurer gets their information. They have, say, bills or checks. They prepare them, and then they sit down with whoever the co-signer is, and the two of them go over it. The documentation is there. Both the checks are signed, are signed by both people, and then they're sent out. If they need the higher level of approval, of course, that they get that. Checks that are coming in would be given to the treasurer, and the treasurer would go ahead and deposit those checks. And then they would have potentially someone else who is doing the books if the treasurer's not. If the treasurer is doing the books, then they would have somebody else do the deposit. And the point of doing that is so that you've got a separate person making deposits, and now the treasurer is validating those deposits against the bank account. Especially if there's cash that comes in. If there's cash that comes in, it should always be verified by two people. And when you verify it, put your initials on it, both people, that this is the amount of cash that comes in. That way, then there's never a question. If there's a discrepancy when it does come in, of course, we would recommend that you notify whoever sent it in and said, this is how much we got, so that the situation can be cleared up. The next thing would be the process of requesting and dispersing funds. So a lot of you have probably seen at the district level, we have a check request form, and I would encourage everyone to have some type of form, you could call it whatever you like, but a request for funds. And in that request for funds, and I'll show you one later, it's basically, who the requester is, who it's made payable to, how is it being sent, check, direct deposit, whatever the case might be, the reason for the expenditure, and then of course the approvals. So that way, again, you've got backup documentation for each expense that you have, so that, you know, when you're audited or your financials are reviewed, whichever, there's a documentation there, no question. They can count for everything coming in and they can account for everything going out. So the next would be dues, fines, and other assessments. Excuse me. So with respect to the collection of those, it would be the same manner. They come through the mail, you would handle it that way. I know a lot of clubs will do fines and that type of thing during the club meeting. As those things happen, if they're paid in cash or whatever, I would encourage at the end of the meeting that, you know, whether it be the treasurer and somebody else, whoever you designate, doesn't matter, just be anybody, you count that cash with the two people, put it in an envelope and initial it that you both have counted it and that's what's there. So that way then that can be validated against what goes into the bank account. So you can